Ariel Pontes is a software engineer and the founder of Humanism Brazil. Through his blog and podcast, Ghostless Machine, he covers philosophy, science, secular humanism, and effective altruism. Ariel, thank you so much for joining us on Humanism Now.
Thanks for having me.
So, as mentioned, you cover a wide range of topics in your work and in your writings and online content, and obviously you're at the forefront of creating humanist communities. Could you give us a bit of background to yourself, your upbringing, and whether there was any faith involved, and your personal journey to humanism?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I was born in Rio, in Brazil, in '88. And a very small kid, I moved with my parents to another city nearby, a smaller city. I was and lived there to 10 years, and then I went back to Rio. I was raised nominally Catholic. I was baptized Catholic, but my family really, and this is actually very common in the southeast of Brazil among like a middle class people. But it is extremely unpopular internationally or unknown. There's this religion called Kardecist Spiritism, which is not very organized. It's by this French author called Allan Kardec. Actually, it wasn't his real name. This was his pen name, because actually this was his claim. Allan Kardec is the spirit who talks through him. He was a psychographer, so he was writing books claiming that these books were revelations from spirits and things like that. He has this book, which is basically the Spiritist Bible, which is the Book of the Spirits. I haven't read it. It's on my list. But basically, I was raised believing in that. I believe it's basically like Eastern religions adapted to a Western Christian public. So I believed in karma, samsara, like the cycle of reincarnations, nirvana, like when you escape samsara and you go back to God. I learned these terms afterwards reading about Eastern religions, and I was like, wait, we have all this, but we didn't use these Eastern names. We just said the reincarnation and cycle of reincarnations and coming back to God and things like that. So that's basically what I believed growing up.
And you were fully believing all of this?
Yeah, I believed. It was kind of a mixture, because you get these influences. I got these influences from family and from friends, but also you get the Christianity. And it all kind of gets mixed in this weird way. When I started questioning, at first I started questioning the idea of God being all good, all powerful, and all knowing, because it seemed contradictory. I very quickly reached the problem of evil. I was like, wait, if God is so good and all powerful, why doesn't he fix all problems? And then whenever I had these kind of questions, my family would always say, go talk to your grandpa. And my grandpa was the spiritual authority of the family, and he was going actually to spiritist centers. He was this, let's say, the most unabashed spiritist. I mean, he didn't even claim much to be a Christian. I mean, he said, well, Jesus, one of the things that spiritists say, all the prophets in all religions, they're all evolved spirits who came to send a message, and the message gets misinterpreted along the way, and that's why we have different religions. But at the end of the day, it's all the same. It's all the same religion. Everyone, it's all about being good and blah, blah, blah. And but Jesus was the most evolved prophet. So
it meshed very well with the Catholic Church as well.
I think it's popular because in Brazil we have this crazy mixture of cultures and of religions, and the indigenous traditions and the African traditions that came, and the Christians that were trying to colonize, and other people who came from other religions, Asians or Middle East, the people of all religions. And somehow this is sort of a very friendly religion, because you can say, I'm not against you. And we are a different religion, but it's the same thing in the end.
And why would you say you really started to question, have these questions? And I guess follow up, how long was it then until the formation of the humanist group in Brazil?
Yeah, so in my early teens, it's when I started questioning this idea of a benevolent God, and then I started reading about it, but I was still very much into spirituality, and I was particularly interested in astral projection, which is basically this idea of leaving your body as a spirit. My aunt said, she claimed that she did it like unintentionally, like she would go to bed and she would see her body, and I found it really cool, and I was like, oh, I want to do this. I want to do this on purpose. So I started following a lot of resources, everything that I could find, documentaries, the internet was appearing. There was some social network that was very popular in Brazil, Orkut. It was by Google. It wasn't very popular elsewhere, but in Brazil it exploded. And I became very excited about this. I think also because when I was a kid, I used to see spirits, or I had this episode, let's say my first episode, when I went to the bathroom once, and I remember still that I looked in the mirror and I saw somebody behind me wearing all blue, and I kind of had a mini panic. I left. I had like, my lips were white, and my family was, what happened? And I said, I saw someone in the bathroom, and they started asking questions. And I had a relative who had recently passed away. So of course they made all these connections, and they told me that, yeah, because children are more pure and more in touch with the spiritual world, and some kids have a gift. So they put me this idea in my head that I'm special and that I'm a medium. So this is what made me very interested in spirituality for a long time. And in a way, what makes me interested in humanism now, because there are many elements of, spiritual questions or religious exploration. It's, at the end of the day, it is a lot about answering existential questions. And now I find my answers in science and philosophy and humanism. But throughout this period, I had a phase where I was trying really hard to get out of the body. And I just started having questions. For example, I had some interesting experiences, but I wasn't sure if I managed to do the proper thing. So I was like, was this a lucid dream? How can I tell a lucid dream? Or how can I tell a dream from actually leaving my body? So I had this instinct. I don't know why. Like, I just had because I wanted to be sure that I'm doing the right thing. And then I'm not fooling myself. But when I would bring this up to other people, they would become defensive. And in spiritist centers where I went, and they said, if you have the skeptical attitude, it's not going to work. And once on this social media platform that I mentioned, somebody posted in this forum some challenge. Hey, on my nightstand, I have a Post-it note with a code or a series of words. And if you guess it, I'll send you $1,000. And some people were trying kind of as a joke to guess. Other people were coming up with all sorts of excuses like, no, when you come out of the body, you don't have your physical eyes, you're in the spiritual realm, you see things differently, it doesn't work like that. And I was like, wait, but then how can you ever know? Why don't you always assume that it's always a dream? What makes you think that there's a separate category if there is no way to test that in any way? So I started reading. This was one of the pivotal events, I guess, this challenge on this social media platform.
That sounds a lot like the excuses that you hear from supposed psychics and mediums, and when they are forced to undertake more scientific testing. They're just stage performance. So it's very interesting. So what do you attribute some of these experiences to now that you take a more scientific worldview? Was it just a product of being a child and having a more hyper imagination, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot about how the brain works, right? I think when we are children, we are in this training mode, so to say. We are gathering a lot of data, and we don't know how to make predictions so well anymore on that basis. And so we are somehow more open to interpret. The input data is more open to interpretation. We are more predisposed to see things as something else. It's kind of also, there's a lot of research on psychedelics lately that also mentions that it puts your brain in a sort of similar mode. It's kind of, you go back to training mode. Instead of just trying to ignore the irrelevant input and focus on taking action and making predictions, you would stop trying to make predictions and you take in as much input as you can. And then suddenly everything becomes very vivid, and you're like, and you are prone to seeing things that aren't there, or to interpret things I don't know, a stick as a snake, or some cloud as a face, and all sorts of things. So now when I look back, and I actually did have, growing older, some other experiences. And when I started looking back with this perspective, I realized that there was often something like a towel. And now my assumption is honestly there was something simple as a blue towel hanging maybe in a funny shape. And when I looked, I just thought it was a person and ran away, and then I didn't come back to check. Something like this. There's this book that I really like and I really recommend by Michael Shermer, The Believing Brain. And he talks a lot about this, all sorts of how the brain works that gives us all these illusions.
Yes, we're much more prone to false positives, and that's an evolutionary survival trick.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that makes a lot of sense. Great. And so then your questioning and reasoning took you to the foundation of Humanists Brazil. Could you provide a little bit about your experiences in setting up the group? And we're talking about a big country here. How are you structured to serve your membership?
So it's very tricky. Okay, let me try to make this concise. First of all, there was a big gap between me becoming an atheist and actually getting involved in humanism. At first, when I was 15, 16, I became an atheist and I stopped. And I started reading. I became very interested. But I started at university and I was busy with other things. I started writing. That's already when I started writing and blogging about atheism and stuff like that. But then, and then I discovered humanism and I got interested. Before I left Brazil, and then I left in 2014. In 2013 or 2012, there were some atheist meetings, some big event where people were trying to do atheist meetups all around the country on the same day. And I went to one of them, and then I think it's the first time that I met people who were somehow present in the community in person. And I joined, I think it was in that period that I joined the previous humanist organization that existed in Brazil, which was Liga Secular Humanista do Brasil, like a LIS. But they were a bigger organization. It's very sad that they don't exist anymore, but they basically collapsed because of the political polarization that was increasing while we approached the election of Bolsonaro. So this really, it imploded because there's some people that were very involved. They became kind of flirting with the alt-right. Suddenly the main causes for them were to fight the woke people, to fight extreme wokeism or whatever they would call it, and in a context where we had an extreme right president winning, so it was a lot of people became extremely frustrated, me included, and they kind of started a separate group, and I joined. It was just a Facebook group. Then eventually they put me as an admin because the guy didn't want to get involved so much anymore, and that's when I started getting involved, and eventually we joined the Humanist International way because there was a change at some point, right, where up to a certain point you had to be registered as an NGO, but then when they dropped this requirement, we figured, okay, now it's easy to join because we are a small group. Unfortunately, we rose from the ashes of this previous organization and we're very small. I tried to have sort of small groups locally, and I'm still trying to some degree. But the way that I do this in Romania, and because I'm also active here in Romania, it's by doing meetups, to meeting people in person. And this is a big challenge in Brazil because it's a very big country. Also because we have very big cities and people are sometimes lazy. I don't know. I went to, for example, an effective altruism meetup in Rio last time I was there. I think it was the first one that ever happened. I kind of helped make it happen. Luckily, there were other people there to help me. And there was people who were travel an hour or more to get there. And it was supposedly a central location, but the infrastructure is not very good. And it's very hot. People sometimes just don't want to go out because it's too hot. So people are very, very online. It's kind of, I think, also contributes to the polarization, the fact that people are so online all the time. So these are a few challenges.
Yeah, 100%. And you mentioned now you live in Europe. So what do you see as the differences in terms of, I guess, the state of secularism and the challenges that you face between living in South America and your experiences living in Europe?
Yeah. I live in Romania, so it's like Eastern Europe. I don't know how. I've lived also in Sweden, and it's very different, for example. So that would be uncomparable. Sweden and Brazil, I would say, well, Sweden is just so light years ahead of us. But Romania is more interesting to compare because there are many things that are better here, but there are also things that are going very slow. I feel like it's a much more conservative country in some way because they have such a rural population, for example. While in Brazil, we have population very concentrated in large cities. So certain things like, I don't know, LGBT, for example, are less of an issue. In Rio, I see gay people all the time, and I see them holding hands, and there are gay parties, and there is a parade, and there are artists that are famously gay, flamboyantly gay on TV since I was a kid. it's like kind of part of life. In Romania, it's so hidden and somehow taboo. So that's one difference. But then at the same time, abortion is illegal in Brazil. And when I say that to people in Romania, they're like, they cannot believe it. They're like, really? In Brazil, there's still and like whole Latin America, what are you talking about? So yeah, there are all sorts of differences.
Yeah, it's always interesting how societal norms just develop and change at different paces. Mm-hmm. And it tends to be regional. I think it's interesting you mentioned that what is the case in Brazil is perhaps also the case throughout Latin America. And similarly, when we look at, Europe, there tends to be, where with the normalization of gay marriage, for example, it happens sort of sweeps across the continent very quickly rather than, small countries changing. So, and I think obviously having that comparison must be helpful with your campaigning work as well, in terms of being able to say, actually, there is another way, and there are other examples we can draw upon. I mentioned at the start, you're also a fellow podcaster and a blogger. The stream is called Ghostless Machine, which is a fantastic name. What was the inspiration and what does it mean for you?
So there's this concept of the ghost in the machine. I think it was with this terminology. I think it appears in this book by what's his name, Gilbert Ryle, I think, a philosopher, who has this book, The Concept of Mind, in which he talks a lot about language and the mind and the concept of mind. Basically, the idea. The way that I like to simplify is that, throughout philosophy, there has always been this idea of, not always, but it's a common recurring theme, the idea of a soul. I mean, in Christian philosophy, of course, there is a soul. And, or in Plato, there are the forms, or there are these ideas of Descartes has the mind-body dualism. And as society became increasingly secular, it became more and more kind of untenable for philosophers to justify, to call these concepts the spirit, to sound very supernatural. So it changed to this notion that people will often say now, I don't believe in souls or spirits, but I still believe, that there is something inside you, the idea of free will, that there is still something, even if I have the same genes and the same upbringing as another person, I will act differently because there is some sort of essence that would allow me to act differently. And that's exactly what I call the ghost in the machine and what I don't believe in. But I reached all this from more humble beginnings, from the anime Ghost in the Shell. I really liked it, and it does have a lot of very interesting philosophical ideas that I hadn't thought about. So when I started reading about it, I reached this book, and I got interested, and I went into this rabbit hole. What my tattoo is about.
I see. We'll have to include a photo along with the along with the description for the podcast listeners.
That's it's just fantastic. Some gears and circuits on my head.
Mm-hmm. And in your podcast, you try to tackle this global phenomenon that is political polarization. And have some sensible discussions around this. What have you learned from these conversations? And what do you see as the best way to tackle this crisis, really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I went into this because I just saw this problem and I became frustrated by how so many people in these activist circles seem to be at war with each other, and they are unwilling to engage with certain people if they have the wrong opinions. And I've simply always been the kind of person who, I don't know, first of all comes curiosity. I'm curious to understand, like, how can these people actually believe these things? Like, it blows my mind sometimes, and I really want to talk to them and understand. And I don't know, maybe for some reason I get triggered less easily than others, so I'm able to have this kind of conversation. I mean, I also get triggered, of course, especially with my family. When I go visit Brazil, there are people that I'm like, okay, I had this conversation. I'm tired of them. I see they're not going anywhere. But also, I mean, I read lately about street epistemology. There's this book, How Minds Change, that they talked about, where they talked about the street epistemology a lot, and I became quite interested. I also read before Peter Boghossian, a guide for creating atheists or something like that, which he also has a lot of, Socratic dialogue. It's basically the idea of dialogue. I was being friendly and listening to the other person and exploring their views without trying to convince them or catch them making a mistake or something like this. And in my experiences, it works in the sense that it's really not as hard as people think to have a peaceful conversation with somebody who disagrees profoundly with you on deep questions. I never had any difficulty. I never had a moment or a conversation that I had to cancel or something going wrong. I haven't had many conversations. I had 3 only so far. But I mean, I do this all the time in my real life. I engage with people and I try to, no matter what they believe, to question them. That's also difficult. Sometimes people don't want to question it because they think they're going to be interpreted in a bad way, or people are going to get very annoyed. When I was a teenager, maybe this did happen to me, but I think I learned. And now I engage. Sometimes I feel like people getting awkward around me or feeling uncomfortable that I'm even bringing this conversation. But the people that are actually engaging with me are usually quite okay with it. So really, I don't know. I think it's a bit the internet effect. We get used to this people screaming at you and all the time, and we forget that real life isn't like that. People can actually be nice.
Absolutely, and if you that engaging people with genuine curiosity and a charitable nature is a much more effective way of developing your own understanding and hopefully influencing some form of change, but the main goal should be to understand better ourselves. And another controversial or potentially controversial topic that you tackle is that of effective altruism, as you mentioned.
Well, recently. Now it's controversial, I guess. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, this is an area which, on its face, sounds entirely, in its purest form, sounds completely reasonable, but of course has come under a huge amount of bad press in recent years. What would be your pitch for effective altruism? Yeah,
my pitch is for the philosophy. It's the effective altruism is the philosophy. It's a philosophy of doing as much good. It's an idea that if you are going to try to do good, and you should, so that's the part of altruism, is that we have a moral duty to help people who are in need, the people who are in a much worse situation than ours. And we should try to do that as effectively as possible to maximize their impact. It basically follows from, in my case specifically, from being a consequentialist. The moment you adopt consequentialism as a moral philosophy, the moment you say that the only thing that matters is the amount of suffering that you reduce, the amount of happiness that you increase, then it becomes very clear that then basically every moral question is reduced to an empirical question. What actually has the best consequences? And once you realize that these questions are so important for the well-being of humans and animals and all sentient beings, you realize that, well, then I better be right about what consequences this intervention is going to have. Because if there's a lot hanging here. So, and this is why I like effective altruism, because they reach similar conclusions. They are very rigorous about their epistemology. They want to know what the truth is, what the current state of affairs in the world really is, what interventions really work, because at the end of the day, this is what matters, results. And I think the world, when you talk about politics and policy, it's so little of it is based on evidence, and so much is based on hype and religion and whatever appeals to people. So it was a big frustration that I have, and it was, I guess, finding effective altruism for me, it was a relief in this sense. It's like, okay, people who are reasonable and they want to bring good consequences to the world, and they care about whether their beliefs are correct and about keeping their beliefs updated constantly, because things change and we get new data, and we have to use science to do, not only to create rockets and technology, but to do good.
Yeah, no, thank you for everything that you do and everything that you advocate for as well. Before we go, we have our standard closing question. Mm-hmm. Ariel, what is something that you've changed your mind on recently?
Yeah, so I guess the biggest, let's say, I had a couple of sort of biggest changes. I guess the latest one was regarding animal welfare. It's funny now because, I went through a period of trying to be vegan, trying to be vegetarian, then settling for reducitarianism, then kind of taking a break even from that, but ignoring these concrete aspects. What I did change my mind about, and it was actually in one of the events that I did with the humanist organization here in Romania. Before I was doing the podcast, before the pandemic, I was doing physical events. That was important to me. I considered sometimes doing that again. But in one of them, I was discussing with a vegan, and at that point, I wasn't vegan. I wasn't even trying. I wasn't even much concerned. I mean, I did care about animal welfare, but I kind of assumed that, there are laws for humane slaughter. We're living in Europe, like these things, industry is regulated. These videos that you see are usually like in some poor country in Asia where they're not being regulated. It seemed to me like the vegans were trying to paint an overly dark image of how the industry actually works. And then after this discussion, they had a lot of good arguments that it was hard for me to have strong arguments. I realized that my arguments were weak in the sense that I don't know. I didn't do a lot of research. I just kind of assumed what was convenient for me to assume. And then when I started going more into it, and I read The Animal Liberation by Peter Singer, that was for me a moment that I was like, I was wrong. It really is bad. It is really, really, really bad. And I was torn because I like meat. I grew up eating meat every day from Brazil, steakhouses, everything. And I was like, I have to do something. And I tried to be vegan for a while. It was too hard. I don't like cooking, blah, blah, blah. Then vegetarian. Then I was reducitarian for a long time. But regardless of what I practice, I acknowledge now that the problem is big in a way that I didn't realize before. And I sympathize more deeply with the vegans, and I feel more supportive, even if I can't resist my own temptations, even if I don't have the willpower to at least, yeah.
Well, I think I would also recommend How Minds Change by David McCraney. Mm-hmm. And one thing that certainly comes through from that is that minds change slowly. And we're all on a journey. So it sounds like we've caught you mid-journey on this. So thank you very much for sharing and your honesty. If our listeners would like to get in touch or find out more, what's the best place to find you?
Yeah, I mean, on ghostlessmachine.com, I have all my links. But my name is Ariel Pontes, and you can find all my tags are something like that on social media. So yeah, Instagram, Facebook.
Well, Ariel Pontes, thank you for your time and everything that you do with Ghostless Machine and Humanist Brazil. And thank you for joining us on Humanism Now.
Thank you for inviting me. Bye.